Hi, I'm Ginny, and after spending so much time over the past decade in hospitals, rehab and care facilities, and interacting with people at all levels in healthcare, my family and I have gained a lot of insight and experience in ways we certainly never wanted nor expected. So I hope our experience with brain injury is helpful to you in some small way. I'm going to just take you through the first few years after the accident and then outline some of our frustrations and challenges with dealing with this. And I apologize for reading a lot of this, and also apologies if some of my medical terminology is not quite right. This is my son, Tyler Coe. Tyler was a brilliant man, proud member of Mensa, had a great sense of humor, loved language, reading, loved to sing, and belonged to a Coke Belly choir in his late teens and early 20s, making friends for life there. And he loved his family and quirky t-shirts. In October 2012, a couple of months before his 33rd birthday, he was involved in a car accident just north of Edmonton. He was airlifted unconscious to the Royal Alexandra Hospital and remained in a coma for about 8 to 10 weeks, 6 of those in ICU. Being introduced to ICU is very confronting, as you're not dealing just with your own trauma, but you're observing others around you going through similar things. Tyler's prognosis for any meaningful recovery was poor, if at all, as we were constantly being reminded. At one point, it was intimated that we should turn off life support. We were told that the Tyler we knew was no longer. Over the year that followed ICU, he spent time in the neurotrauma observation ward, the regular neurotrauma ward, and finally in pulmonary when it was felt that his issues were primarily lung-related. Funnily enough, his only visible injury was a little indentation above his eye where his head connected with the handle above the driver's door. And he had a hairline fracture on one of the vertebrae that required wearing a neck brace for a little period of time. He endured endless tests and underwent several surgeries to reduce pooling on the brain and to remove the damaged part of his lung due to a blood clot. And that prompted insertion of a filter in his groin. He was intubated and had a feeding tube installed in his stomach. The tube was later moved down to the duodenum, I think, and a gastric drain inserted to try and alleviate the constant aspirations. Because of this, keeping his upper body elevated at all times was critical. He was never able to sleep flat, which bugged him a lot. Nerve damage from the accident caused his legs to move wildly for many months, which was upsetting and caused a lot of creativity trying to keep them still so he wouldn't hurt himself. Over the first few months, attempts were made to move the trach many times, but he couldn't sustain good oxygen levels, so it ended up taking a full year before it could be removed. Doctors thought that Tyler's pre-existing condition of myotonic dystrophy may have kicked into action from the accident, and it complicated and slowed his recovery. It was a wild card which made understanding his condition very difficult. During the time in neurotrauma, Tyler's legs began to slowly settle down and he managed more periods of wakefulness. He started to make some meaningful movements with his hand and head gestures when asked. Both were difficult to understand, but it was a beginning. He continued to slowly improve during his time in the pulmonary ward. After a year at the Royal Alex, Ty was assessed for transfer to the Halver Johnson Centre in Ponoka for rehabilitation. He was rejected initially because it was felt that his health issues were too complicated for them. I wrote a letter of appeal to the doctor in charge and they agreed to reassess him, and then they did accept him. So at the end of January 2014, he transferred out there and spent a year there, getting intensive physio, speech therapy, amazing place, amazing. And towards the end of the time there, usually a year is the limit, Tyler started resisting doing more. I think he just had enough of that constant effort. He also was walking with minimal assistance by then, improved in strength, general health, and awareness. I could understand him when I phoned him. So he really made pretty good progress after that year. There are only 5 places in Edmonton with appropriate facilities and staffing levels to take care of Tyler. We did a quick tour of all of them except the Edmonton General. And that was absolutely my last choice because both Tyler and his sister had been born there when it was still an active care hospital. But due to the persuasiveness of the manager at the time of the complex care unit, this is where he ended up. In the end, it turned out to be a great choice. When Tyler arrived at the General, he was able to walk with assistance still, and for the most part was still continent. But we saw a slow but steady decline in all aspects of his health after that. His ongoing complication was always the myotonic dystrophy, and it continued to negatively affect his eating, swallowing, walking, and of course, his speech throughout his life. A few years after the accident, a doctor operated to repair the stoma as the stoma had never fully closed, thinking this might help his speech efforts and might enable him to eat again. Stayed closed for a little while, but a small pinhole opened up and the surgeon didn't feel it was worth the risk to do it again. Swallowing assessment from the Glenrose recommended trying him with ice chips and sorbet, and that was wonderful because it gave Tyler the sense of tasting something. However, he had a longer hospital stay from aspiration, and that caused a big setback in his general condition, as each hospitalization seemed to, and put an end to the sorbet and ice chips, much to his great disappointment. The years that followed were a mix of ups and downs, wins and losses. At times he seemed to get stronger and do better, and other times he was in hospital often from aspirations. Then the hospitalizations were less frequent, but his mobility and speech continued to decline. Around 2019, he was told he needed a BiPAP machine at nighttime, but he refused, even though we told him it would likely shorten his life. Some of the frustrations we went through, many times over the years, items were recommended to be added to Ty's care plan, but they faded away over time with no clear reason why. Probably the challenge of ensuring the constantly changing staff were trained and informed, but also maybe Tyler's resisting doing things which were difficult for him. Tyler's frustration and ours was with staff not taking the time and making the effort to figure out what he was saying. Some were concerned they wouldn't be able to understand him anyway, and he used to get angry one of the few times when he was dismissed or ignored. Over time, with more regular stuff, they got to know him and make an effort to understand him a little better. As a family member, it seems there's a limit to how much advocating you can do to get the best care for your loved one without getting caregivers offside. Sometimes it caused a reduction in care and attention rather than the increase we were looking for. We tried to be considerate of everyone as much as we could, but it was always a really difficult balance. Let's face it, caregiving is a difficult job, and I totally understand the issue of staff burnout. Most of our interactions over the years with healthcare professionals were positive, and only a handful of challenges come to mind. A doctor gave me some wonderful insight when he said I needed to be a strong advocate for Tyler at all times, despite resistance from medical staff, as many doctors don't have time to review all of a patient's chart, so things get missed. In Tyler's case, missing important information was dangerous for safety and well-being. Advocating from a distance was really difficult, so it prompted us to move back to Edmonton a couple of years after his accident, putting an end to the 5 trips a year of several weeks each we were making to Edmonton at the time. On one occasion, arriving at the hospital, we found Tyler strapped to the bed, slid down into a prone position, yelling for help, but no one was around. So that was pretty distressing, and that was those things were part of the reason that we did move back. On a positive note, though, during a hospitalization just before one Christmas, he shared a room with 3 fellows who were pretty rough, to put it politely, and I was really concerned for Tyler's safety. I needn't have worried, though, as one by one over the next few days, each of those men showed their amazing humanity by taking care of Tyler and alerting staff when help was needed. And each of them actually gave him a small Christmas gift. Those guys all had hearts of gold, looked out for Tyler and kept him safe over the few weeks they shared the room. I'll never forget that. If our biggest worry for Tyler's safety, as far as being kept upright so he wouldn't aspirate, speech and communication was always our biggest challenge. Tyler wanted to communicate constantly. He was a very smart guy, used lots of complex words, ones which most of us don't use on a regular basis. Well, maybe you do, but they're harder to decipher. He would also correct any mispronunciations you made, which was difficult if you didn't realize you were mispronouncing a word in the first place. Ty would come up with gems of obscure information only loosely related to your conversation. Those could be especially difficult to figure out. We communicated largely by context and by guess, supplemented with the basics of an alphabet board and finger spelling. Use of different electronic communication devices were tried, but Ty resisted using them because he felt people would think he was stupid. And it was also difficult because he was incredibly limited in movement with his arms and shoulders and his vision. We continued to encourage him to slow down his speech and to articulate each syllable. Again, he believed when he spoke slowly, people would think he was stupid. He also believed he was speaking a lot more clearly than he was. To be fair, he was eager to participate in the conversation and get his comments in quickly. Excuse me. We asked him to fingerspell when we couldn't figure out a word, but an hour or two of all this intense concentration was exhausting. Tyler loved doing crosswords, and it became our best times for communication. I would say the clues, and Tyler and my husband gave the answers. Because I usually knew the answers, I could predict what Tyler would say, as he usually knew them too. So it made for a good positive experience with him being understood. And it generated lots of conversation and laughs. Tyler was very limited in any activities he could do. He couldn't read, he couldn't use the iPad because of his eyesight and arm limitations. Couldn't lift his arms high enough to scratch his head. So speech and communication were pretty much it for him. For a small period of time, he could leg propel his wheelchair, but as his muscles weakened, he couldn't even do that. Boredom was a huge, huge issue. One thing he could do, though, was operate a TV remote. So many hours were spent in front of TV. He developed a passion for cooking shows, which was ironic because he couldn't eat, but also he was hungry all the time. I used to say he could probably get a master's degree in cooking theory. Excuse me. Tyler's condition continued to slowly deteriorate, and in the last couple of years, his eyelids were closed most of the time, and his hand spelling got sloppier, making it even more difficult to communicate with him. In your work, you're dealing with families who are incredibly stressed, tired, emotional, and don't always act appropriately as they would normally, and you need tons of empathy, understanding, patience, and good listening skills. Families come from widely varying and very different situations and backgrounds, as I'm sure you know. Periods of despair, anger, and guilt about our situation are frequent. When life is turned upside down, there isn't a map on how to go forward. Dealing with the constant cycle of information overload, changing emotions, decision-making, trying to balance the well-being of themselves, others in the family, with the needs of the person with the brain injury is exhausting. Tyler passed away suddenly of a heart attack just over 2 years ago, brought on by the stress of what he endured, the huge amount of medication he constantly required, and of course, the unknown effects of myotonic dystrophy. All in all, he received an amazing level of care. Considering his initial dire prognosis, doctors, nurses, and staff generally didn't hold back treatment or care which might have improved his situation. I believe his quality of life, though, could have been improved were it not for the year he spent immobile in a hospital bed with only minimal physiotherapy. Ty was an important member of our family with a great sense of humor, No matter how he was feeling, he continued to have huge empathy for the plight of others and always considered himself lucky and not like the others. I don't think he ever really understood the gravity of his own situation. We were so grateful for the 8 years we had with him. He gave so much to his family and friends and the staff who cared for him, as much or more as what we gave him. Healthcare professionals who are willing to think outside the box of usual responses to specific individual difficulties presented by someone with a brain injury are heroes in my mind. Each case you come across, I'm sure, is very different, as are the solutions required for some of the unique problems. I know it's your job, and I understand how frustrating it might be at times. No matter how much knowledge you throw at a problem, it may not work. Please keep trying. We may not have been able to properly solve the communication issues with Tyler, but maybe you can with someone like him in the future. What you do is so important and can have such a profound effect on those living with a brain injury and also on those who love them. Ty used to say he was famous because so many people had come across him in his long and complicated journey following the accident and remembered him because of the uniqueness of his situation. The healthcare professionals who took the time to know Tyler told us that their knowledge and lives were enhanced by knowing him, and we're forever grateful for that. He's usually hugely missed, but we have some wonderful memories. Thank you.